Is Trevor Lawrence a dynasty-changing prospect? He's a critical player to evaluate for this draft cycle in 2021, and we're going to get to it, especially from the Superflex lens, because he is going to be costly, and there's going to be a lot of leverage on whether he works out and to what degree for your dynasty franchises out there. Welcome to the Footballguys Dynasty Show. I'm your host, Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara, and here we are talking about Trevor Lawrence, the name. He just had his private workout. All of half of the NFL was there, even though 12 to 14 of them have zero chance of acquiring him in the draft. Maybe that's some future scouting there. But for our scouting purposes in Dynasty, he is largely viewed as the 101. Don't even think about it in Superflex. And maybe late first round, early second round at a minimum, but 101 rookie in Superflex will be costly. There are drops at the quarterback position that make people potentially feel more on edge than ever to address that position and quote unquote fix it for the next 5, 10, 15 years. So we're going to break down Trevor Lawrence as a prospect and really as an asset here entering his NFL draft as well as his first NFL season.
Yeah, I think the debate around him centers on you have to have reasonable expectations, honestly. And when you look at these guys that go in the top 10 of the NFL draft, it's about a 50-50 shot on whether they hit multiple times for a top 12 seasonal finish in their career. And that might seem low, right? That might not seem like that high of a threshold, but 50-50 isn't particularly high there. So I do think expectations matter to some degree, right? So to sort of bank him in as being a dynasty changer, to me, particularly at the cost of which you could do it, seems like a bridge too far. When you look at quarterbacks generally in the top 10 of the NFL draft, I think we're going to have 3 or 4 of them this year. And when you sort of look at their history, we're not particularly good at picking which one's going to be the best one, right? Or which one, ADP hasn't shown to be statistically significant in terms of picking who's more likely to hit, and the order that they go in the NFL draft hasn't shown to do that either. And so when you combine the two, I do think that it's interesting with how expensive he is that there may be a potential pivot point. When I look at his stats, I wonder, the generational moniker gets thrown around a little bit. And one of the things that I wonder is what's that mean in terms of generational what? Is it a generational floor or a generational ceiling? Because when I sort of look at his stats and some of the advanced metrics, just in terms of all of these things, right? Some services have passing grades and stuff for college, and then you look at some of the performance therein. He's an extremely high floor player, but hasn't really cracked the top 10% in terms of performance, in terms of quarterback rating, any of those things. Even when you get into more discrete subsets of quarterback production, he just doesn't do that when you compare him against prior NFL draft picks over the past 8 to 10 years or so in terms of when we have that data. So I think it's interesting, right? It's a super high floor in terms of like all of his finishes have been in the top 15 or 20%, but none of them have cracked the top 10. So when you compare it to, Wilson had a better statistical season in terms of all of his stats. Fields had 2 of them that were better than anything that Lawrence had in terms of, again, some of the stats. And then you have sort of Lance, which is not exactly apples to apples. Mac Jones as well had a higher ceiling season than Lawrence did. So I wonder, when you sort of look at that, what are we measuring for? Are we measuring for a really safe floor? Or are we measuring for a really high ceiling? Because I think those two things are different conversations, and I think it's the way you center that, I think, should help shape your decision in terms of where you're going with the pick.
Yeah, and we've also had promising rookie seasons. Let's advance one season into the future, right? I mean, Joe Burrow showed some promise, right? That, he's not really on that bust track of looking, say, overwhelmed, or the fact that he's not going to be in the top, 15 or 20 this season or in the future, a future season. That would kind of get him on that, I don't even know if he's going to finish his rookie deal on that same team sort of trajectory. So looking at year one, just as that vantage point would be, Joe Burrow and others of what track are you on is an important, starting point. One thing that I was interested, because I kind of looked at this as well, and this all centers from, Jordan sent out, as he does, things that are
highly controversial,
thought-provoking. Sure, I was going to say thought-provoking, but sure, controversial on Twitter. That sort of, you can go down and pick up the breadcrumbs, going down through the forest. And where does that lead? Does that lead to the gingerbread house or someplace else? So I was kind of looking into this, and I was kind of surprised that the biggest difference between 101 and let's call it the field, and that's funny because it has Justin Fields in it, but the rest of the top half, generally, you see a gap. Not a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL draft go like 19 overall, 21 overall. Typically, you go early, or you get those, I'm trading in or I'm sticking there in the late first round, in the last 5-10 picks, and I'm drafting someone to get that fifth year option. So typically quarterbacks, if they're going to go, they go early. So that subset is a pretty fertile one in terms of sample size of round one, the top half of round one. And I was kind of surprised to see that the hit rate between, for top 12, let's say, and you were doing it from the multiple seasons, even one season, it's pretty similar, 101 versus the field, as I call it. They're both in the 70s. Yet, if you're looking at top 6 seasons, so let's actually say we're looking for impact here, and not saying QB 5 or 6 is like the ultimate end game for you change to dynasty season, because it's really not. You have to be in the top grouping to really change the game for that 1 year for that team. But it really is a big difference. 77% for the 101, 47% for the rest of the top 16. So there is a pretty big difference there. Now, and the density of the hit is a lot more too. They average, about 3 or 4 top 12 seasons and 3 of those in the top 6. So there is an advantage there. And the thing I'm going to focus on, which I think you brought up a good point, is as a prospect, is he really that much better than the other quarterbacks that are likely to go in the top 10 this year? And then the final point is going to be the matter of cost, right? So 101 versus, you would think QB4, whoever the QB4 is in a Superflex rookie draft, is going to seep into the back half of round one. At a minimum, we're going to get a bunch of round one wide receivers. You're going to get a couple, probably top 40 or so, maybe one in round one, running backs that they're going to go. Someone of that 4 is going to, of the quarterbacks, maybe one goes to Detroit. You've got Jared Goff there. I have Lance, Trey Lance or one of the other guys. They're going to sit for a little bit. They're going to have to simmer, and they don't have an overt start right away sort of landing spot. They may end up going easily QB4. They may go 108, 109, 110, but I have a hard time, we rarely see this, but unless they have a real stink about them, they don't go in round 2, right, of Superflex rookie drafts. But what can that get you? 101 trading back to getting QB3, getting QB4. We're in a 2 QB draft together. I'm sure, there's going to be a pretty big divide between the last one of that group and the first one, meaning, Trevor Lawrence most likely. So that's really the interesting part to me. I do think that there's an advantage that 101 has. The question you have is the cost or the price point for that differential. And then it goes back to sort of the most basic way I talk about finding high-level fantasy producers at quarterback, which is diabolical passer. Patrick Mahomes would qualify now. We had Drew Brees, Peyton Manning, guys like that. We've seen that story before where you're not getting by on mobility. Mobility isn't the reason. Rushing numbers. And then you have the overt rushers. Lamar Jackson qualifies. Michael Vick. These types of examples where you may have big questions about them as a passer, but they run so much. It's like you get a quarterback spot and you get a running back spot all into that quarterback lineup position. So that's the other way. And then the third way is probably the most preferred, which is you're above average as a runner and you're really good as a passer. So I think it's that middle ground where Trevor Lawrence, if he does get into the top 1, 2, 3, 4 for a season, I think it's going to be that way. I think it's going to be he's above average. He's good as a passer, and he provides that, Russell Wilson type, 250, 300, 400, maybe even rushing yards that offset and gets an advantage over the non-mobile guys and even some of the mobile guys. So I think that middle ground is going to be how he gets there. So now you have to kind of say how much of an advantage, because I think you have guys like Trey Lance and Justin Fields, they could get there on the rushing part alone. So
Mhm.
that fantasy wise, and this is where I think maybe you were going to go as well, which is you kind of need, you can separate, someone can be good as an NFL quarterback, and that doesn't necessarily translate to, well, they're number 5 in the NFL, and that means they're number 5 in fantasy. It doesn't always work that way. So I think Fields and Lance specifically as runners, they are historically rare with the ceiling that they could potentially hit NFL wise, especially with how quarterbacks and offenses are being designed this year as opposed to 20 years ago. They have some tactical advantages coming out at the right time.
Yeah, and they're very different in terms of their passing, right? And the what I think is interesting is like you look at a lot of Lawrence's passing, and a lot of it's the quick stuff, right? I mean, it's like 55-60% of it is the quick stuff, and that's a huge number, right? That's a huge number. Whereas you look at a guy like Fields, it's more like it's only about 30% of it's the quick stuff. And there's a lot more of that, then there's a question about his processing, right? But we sort of know what he is as a rusher. Same thing with Lance. Like, I haven't seen a ton of him, but the analysis that I have seen on him from, people I trust is like he does make, he kind of operates more of a pro offense, right? In terms of how he's handled, how he's used, the decisions that he makes and those sorts of things, which I think is interesting, from a developmental standpoint. The knock has been on Fields is, hey, he's just not quick enough in terms of his decision making. I think that'll be an interesting thing to watch. But they do have bailout. It's kind of like the Josh Allen thing. And I hate to use Josh Allen as a comp just because he's so rare, but right, he got away with like being a very good fantasy asset for a couple of years by not being a particularly good passer, just because he could, we're talking, 6, 7, 8 touchdowns, and he could run, and he could put up, 50 yards in a game and rush one in. And all of a sudden, he throws a passing touchdown, and you have a serviceable, you add that up 16 times and you have a pretty good finish. Right. And that was kind of what he was doing. And now this year he takes the huge leap. So it does give you more of a much higher floor in terms of that development as a passer. One of the things you don't see is historically what I would call like the pocket passer types. It takes them longer. So you're looking at like Matt Ryan, Breeze, Rivers. Historically, like those guys just tend to take longer to sort of get to levels of fantasy, high end production. And I think that's an interesting thing with him. I do think Lawrence can run, right? And this isn't an anti-Lawrence thing. It's more of a, if we were having this discussion
Arbitrage.
about, yeah, right. It's if Lawrence was going, at 36 overall, I'm all in, right? But when he's going ahead of Dak Prescott and Russell Wilson, you're like, oh, like, are we going to do this? Right? Is this what we're going to do? I've used this analogy before with quarterbacks and wide receivers in particular. Like, you got to date them. Like, you can't marry these people on first dates. And that's, you don't go on a date with someone and then propose and get married at over coffee, right? You date them, you meet their family, right? You go on vacation, maybe you live together, right? And because that'll, spend some time together, and who leaves the toilet seat up, who doesn't, all those things, right? And let's see some adversity, right? What happens when things aren't easy, right? All of those things. And then you can sort of say, all right, like this is a person I want to spend, the rest of my life with or whatever. That's kind of quarterback, right? We don't know the transition that a lot of these players will make. And it's a lot of, we think he will. But again, I wonder when this generational tag, is it talking about ceiling or is it talking about floor, right? And if it's talking about floor, the question I have is like, is there other ways to capture that? Right. That's really the dichotomy, because if you can capture that you can do it multiple ways, right? Like you talk about arbitrage. What's that?
Floor, well, I was going to say floor is a horrible thing to think about when you're talking about most prospects, because prospects inherently, as you kind of alluded to it and outright said it, I mean, they have a wild range of outcomes, and that includes transitioning to the NFL, potentially, being a different subset of injuries that can just derail you from the very get-go, but so it's like when you start saying floor, I was like, well, why don't you just pivot from the 101 to get like a truckload of things, including like, Matthew Stafford, Kirk Cousins, like if you want a quarterback, why don't you use 101 to get something like that plus many other things?
Right. And that's kind of the thing that I was thinking, like, could you pivot off of 101 if you're looking to try and kind of do both, right, you can do that in different forms, right? Can you take Matthew Stafford? Can you take Kirk Cousins, right? Can you take one of these guys that presents that we kind of know what they are, right? And that's a pretty high floor. They're not going to crater out. You're not going to have like a Sam Darnold type finish out of them unless they're hurt. And at the same time, you can take a shot on someone else who's high upside, right? You can sort of blend the two and you make the bet in multiple forms. I think that's an interesting way to do it.
You think it's possible to move down from 101 to get QB4 in this class plus get Cousins or Stafford?
Yeah, I think you can get more than that.
So now you're encapsulating the ceiling of a running option, because I don't think Zach personally, I mean, this is really early, but I don't think Zach Wilson is going to be the QB4. I think we're going to have some tea leaves, and we'll see if it's Lance. We'll see if it's Lance or Fields or whatever. But I was actually going to ask. I mean, the best season between 2021 and 2022. If I gave you Cousins or Stafford, so take whichever one, versus Lawrence, who do you think has the best single season of those options for the next 2 seasons?
Do I get Stafford and Cousins together, or do I get Lawrence? Like, do I have to pick at a cap?
Well, just pick whichever one you want. Pick whichever one of those two.
I mean, I think Stafford probably is the best blend of ceiling and floor.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, he could get into the top 5, but you'd be pretty surprised if he didn't finish in the top 15, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, so this is what we call, trying to, bake in insulation, because if you move back, okay, I could still. This is what I love about those deals. So Stafford could pace or like be the biggest producer in the whole deal for the short term. And then you say, if I roll snake eyes, say Stafford, ends up retiring at 36, 37, whatever, just shorter than maybe your typical quarterback these days. Or if Lawrence really is the goods, now I'm at a point 2 years from now where it's like, hey, I paced him with Stafford, but now, Lawrence is 23, 24 and on this great trajectory. I don't have anything, but guess what you do? You may have gotten it right equally, or still having the best player in the whole deal being Fields or Lance or Wilson or whatever quarterback in this example we're creating. I mean, you could have gone a different position too, but we're creating this environment. You can actually have 2 quarterback shots, one for the short term, one for the longer term, instead of all in the bushel basket for Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, and that's one of the. Again, I'm open to the idea that I'm missing something, right? I'm open to the idea that
people have been on him since a freshman, and like this is an Andrew Luck sort of like, if this isn't a revelation of like this year sort of thing, they've been talking about him since did he win a national title as a freshman? I mean, so the point is he's been on this big track for 3 years now. This has not been like a 1 to 2 year rising, situation.
Right. And it looks much different than like Zach Wilson, for example, who came
out of the ether relatively. Yeah.
Correct. And so, I mean, that's the thing. The one thing I think about a little bit with him is, you had this really, really high floor, and him coming in, he's very good from a young age. How did he get significantly better? And that's the thing that I sort of look at, and I say, I'm like, like when you look at his stats, like he a little bit of a jump in yards per attempt. But again, it's not like when you rank these guys on in terms of who had the best, he's not there. Right. So again, I think the floor is really high. I just wonder what the ultimate ceiling is. I'm open to the idea that something is not being picked up in numbers. The question I would have would be, well, why? Right? What is it that's elite about him that's not being picked up in numbers? And that's kind of the question that I will have, that I'm going to frame my analysis on him throughout the rest of the time, because I'm not bailing on 101. This isn't that conversation. I do think, with what I have seen, with what I have done, I spent a lot of time this week, like looking at this, because it's a question that I've had. It just keeps coming up and I can't quite figure it out. And so, it's the more information, and we're constantly inputting it. Right. And when we don't, when we look and see, I think this is a good, it's like a Rorschach test, right? When you're seeing something that everyone else is seeing differently, right? Why is that? And is it something that you need to adjust, or is it something that you've spotted in terms of the market's maybe wrong on, or sort of miscalibrated on? And that's a place where I think a lot of work is warranted. So I'm open to the idea that I'm sort of missing something with Lawrence, but I'm looking for what I'm missing, right? That's what I'm going to spend my next 2.5 months with him looking for.
Yeah. And I will say and again, I do not trust it. And again, the NFL can't, get it right as well as they would want to as well. But
Right.
my projection model, which goes over the skill positions, quarterback is the one I'm least comfortable with. But I will say Lawrence is very good. He's in that top 5-6%, but Fields is higher. Trey Lance is higher. Zach Wilson is not. And this strictly looks at fantasy. So this is not connecting to NFL success. It's strictly looking at fantasy, which a part of that is the rushing component, and like I mentioned, I think Fields and Lance offer more upside in that regard. And I think your comparison to Josh Allen is a good one where you say, or Lamar Jackson would be examples recently of saying you can be elite as a fantasy producer and still be a work in progress to some degree as a passer. So those two things, and that could be different from we think you're going to lead our NFL franchise for a decade, after your first season in the NFL. And what I would remind folks is, and we've had countless examples of this, going back to Jameis Winston and Mariota and Derek Carr and Blake Bortles, these false positives of getting on a positive trajectory early, and 2 or 3 years later, it's like, oh, I just rubbed this startup pick that was in round 2 on my face, and the average, I go back to this all the time. So the best tier for quarterback is 101. And yet you sit there and the average finish in year one, fantasy wise, for the 101 quarterback is QB 23 or QB 24. It's between those. And only once Cam Newton to finish in the top 6 as a rookie was Cam Newton. This dates back to the 90s. So to consider that like you mentioned with Trevor Lawrence, like, is it a floor play? Is this a long-term insulation play? Because if you draft 101/Trevor Lawrence at the late first or early second round of your startup draft, the return, comparatively to the players around them, quarterback or otherwise, likely in that year one, you're going to get in Superflex, on average, you're getting a marginal secondary quarterback flex play. That's what you're getting. So you're hoping for moments. You're hoping for positivity that points you to a year 2 where you see a lot more. This is when I become a top 6 option or top 12 option. That's when it generally occurs. The light comes on, the progression happens, the game slows down. But year one, that has to be a part of your consideration, your mindset, because getting lightning in a bottle right away out of your quarterback that you're drafting as a rookie, as a pivotal part of your drafting startup strategy, that needs to be eradicated from your thought process, in my opinion, to get all the way there.
Yeah, I'm with you. Does this change? If you have 101 in there's multiple ways you can get it, right? You could be a really bad team, right? You could be an okay team that had a really bad year. You could somehow have come into the pick through another way, right? A trade, where it just broke your way, you traded up, whatever. Is that do those different, right? If you're contending versus not contending right now, does that sort of change what you're trying to accomplish with 101 via Lawrence?
Well, I think talking through this, and I hadn't really thought about the two-way go of like, well, you can trade for an established quarterback plus something else, plus a later pick in round 1 or otherwise. And to me, talking through it, I think that would be the global strategy I would utilize. Now, maybe if you're a destitute, well, I still think you would want more picks. Like if you are an orphan and not a very good team, just across the board, I don't think going for Trevor Lawrence as he'll be there in 3 years when I'm finally ready to contend. And I have all these, pieces from previous classes and free agency and all these things put together and I'm finally ready. Lawrence will only be 25. Like, I don't think that's the correct approach. I think you can leverage, this is in Superflex, the 101 and Lawrence this year. I think this is really one of the big opportunities you have to trade down to get this, a later first, a future first, plus maybe a quarterback that's going to produce equally or better than him in the first couple of years of having him. Like, you have a lot of options like that to build out your team in 2, 3, 4 ways. So that's sort of what I'm thinking. If you need quarterback, I think going the veteran route from that pick. You were mentioning, if that pick and he is going late first round, I think, late first round, early second round, you have a lot of leverage there within the quarterback position. I mean, I was able to acquire for cheaper than, I thought was possible, Deshaun Watson, for example, in the past week. And
is that the trade we talked about? I think
yeah. So, I mean, I basically gave up Justin Fields and a couple of, maybe they turn into something, maybe they don't, from a team that I was like, this is like blood in the water, right? Deshaun Watson right now, like, he may not play this whole season. It's going to be a massive holdout. All that is true. All that is potential risk factor, but it's also like when reports come out and you get Tyreek Hill for 30 cents on the dollar, you kind of need to embrace upside and possibilities and profiles when you get discounts, because typically there has to be distress to be a distressed asset. Like for a giant mansion to go for a cheap price, there has to be something wrong, right? So that's the only chance you get. So Deshaun Watson was one I almost think now. I mean, if this continues a little longer, couldn't you trade 101 for Watson plus maybe? You mentioned Russell Wilson. You mentioned maybe, someone like Dak Prescott. But you have a lot of options, especially if you're willing to go older, like Aaron Rodgers or Cousins or Stafford or Matt Ryan. I mean, slumming it, right? Slumming it with these types of guys. And I wanted to ask you, from a building a profile perspective of Justin Herbert, who I actually have one spot ahead of Trevor Lawrence, because look at what he did as a rookie. Like the threshold he cleared already, and he really didn't use his rushing. That's really the best part of it to me is Herbert proved so much as a passer, and yet he really could be unlocked a lot more as a runner. And I almost view Justin Herbert, his 2020 season, as a wildly success story of Trevor Lawrence. If that were to occur, I don't think people realize how rare that Herbert story actually is, of coming in and looking comfortable and dissecting defenses purely as a passer right away from the get-go.
Yeah. And I think you have to take him over Lawrence, right? I mean, I don't even think, just in terms of what right? You already rule out the whatever it is.
Can't hang factor.
Right. The 20-30% that, hey, he's drunk all the time. The Dwayne Haskins problem. Not that we think that, but we don't know. Not
a preparer, not a leader of a team, not really blending well with a coaching staff of like, you've got to be the oracle of this offense in this franchise. Right.
You sort of, you rule out whatever that hazard is there. Right. And then you just go on to the fact that, hey, he's, well above what you would deem a threshold success as a rookie, right? I mean, I think you have to take that over Lawrence, and then when you sort of look at some of the other guys too, one of the questions that I get frequently is, hey, how do you sort of measure, his longevity factor versus some of these older guys, right? Whether it's Dak or whether it's Watson or Wilson, right? Who's a little bit further along. Those are typically the guys that conversation is about. I say, well, you got to get there for it to be a longevity factor, right? You have to
compare good versus good or elite versus elite before you even get it to the, how many years of that do I have left?
Right. And so that's for me, because, and like, there's a non-zero chance. And I think that people, I mean, here's what I would say is, if Trevor Lawrence is Baker Mayfield, okay, who good,
has had his moments. Up and
threshold down. Starter, right? I mean, he's a starter on a playoff team. Okay.
Two pretty good years, but fantasy wise has been relatively marginal.
Right. And was going as quarterback 4 in a startup draft not that long ago. Right. So again, we're not infallible at these things, right? We do this. We miss on quarterbacks because we go too early. If that's what we do, right? If that's what we do, and we had him higher relative to the position than he's going in 80, and then Lawrence is going in ADP right now. Okay. So don't say that this isn't possible. If he's Baker Mayfield, this is a catastrophe at this price. It's a catastrophe. Right. You just can't do that. Right. You can't do that. And what's the odds of that happening? It's a lot greater than anyone will say. Right. It's a lot. And the other thing that I'll say about this too is I did research for AOD this year, which was, look at the average age of the top 6 and the top 12 finishers, right? Like, look at how, and that's as a proxy for how good the position is, right? As a, if the position's really old, it warrants, hey, maybe we can sort of press the envelope on a younger guy because we're sort of, there's an advantage there. It's as young as we found, right? So why do this, right? Why go over Allen? Why go over Dak? Why go over Deshaun Watson, right?
They're
Why
all
go
nice and young. I mean,
right?
and people
You
want
don't
to say
have
that
to,
Russell Wilson is old. He's 32.
right?
Worry about
Right.
your dynasty team in 2025 when you get closer.
Right, right. And that's the thing. That's really the thing. Like I don't think you need to make the longevity bet because again, what's the difference
Especially
between
at quarterback.
right,
Especially at
especially
quarterback, because the threshold of can you play, can you hang, will you have a job in 5 years is tough to get over. So if you
correct.
have a guy that you don't know is over that threshold, then I mean you're adding so much undue risk. I mean, didn't you think who was it? I mean, what, 2-3 years ago, didn't you think Jared Goff was like worlds away? Like he was so far over that. Oh, this is the marriage with Sean McVay. This is going to be tremendous. And now he got traded, and basically they had to give extra draft capital to say, take this guy.
Yeah, I don't think that I would push back on the extra thing because I don't think that actually happened.
But my point is
that's
though,
the narrative on it happening. I'll agree with you on that.
Here's what I would say is that good quarterbacks in general, if you're good right now, they don't get out of somebody's building with rare exception.
Correct.
So to trade them away, and we've seen way more NFL trades where someone is traded away and it's like, it ends up being a whirlwind for the team taking them on. So, and we'll see about Matthew Stafford. The Lions just moving in a different direction. They haven't been very good. So there's some mindset things going on there. But just in general, you don't get out of the building. And that's always been my approach with Dak Prescott, right? Like he's going nowhere. Like whether he's franchised this year, and I mean, it doesn't seem like it's headed down a Kirk Cousins type threshold. And so that's why I just meant from the NFL stability standpoint of being the face of a franchise and your job is safe. Like you really should still dynasty wise be looking through a 2, 3, 4 year lens.
Yeah, totally. I went back and I looked. I think it's from 2010 through like 2018 or so. There was 30 quarterbacks that were drafted in the first round. I think it was through 2018. I incorporate a couple of 19 guys too, but I sort of put them in a maybe category. So I broke them down into whether they are either on track or did earn basically, like the NFL version of like a super max, like that they get the franchise quarterback extension. So there's a yes group, there's a no group, and then there's a maybe group. So I put in the maybe group just because we're not totally sure yet. Kyler Murray, Daniel Jones, Mayfield, Darnold, and Trubisky, right? I think multiple of those guys are probably no. I think Murray's probably going to be a yes, but for this exercise, I just put him in the we're not sure yet. And so again, there's 30.
You're very generous towards the Trubisky family.
I'm very generous towards that. I'm not generous. Sure. Right. I haven't ruled him out yet. So
still a chance, baby.
It's because I mean, heck, Chicago could really go like 6 years, like 185 million, and really lock this thing down if they don't get Wentz. So again, I basically took it then and looked at these 30 guys that earned it, didn't earn it, and then are maybes. So 16 guys weren't extended. Didn't receive sort of the long-term extension by their team. 9 of them did or will, right? So I included Josh Allen in this and Lamar Jackson in this as guys that I think will, but haven't yet. So we can they're in that category of kind of on the hit, on that range. When you sort of look at the 7 guys who earn the extension with their team, it's Watson and Mahomes, and then it's Goff, Wentz, Andrew Luck, Cam Newton, and Sam Bradford. And when you think about that, so we say like, hey, what's the longevity, right? What's the longevity factor? What's the odds that these guys are going really deep that are going to be the guy for a long term? Like it's about a 1 in 3 shot. And then when you say, all right, well, what's the chance that, okay, now they get to there, what's the chance that they're going to go for a super long period of time? And I mean, we have seen it. Goff and Wentz haven't even played on their extension yet. Right. And they're already, I mean, it's incredible. And honestly, neither have Watson or Mahomes. Right. So, I mean, we think, and I'm very bullish on Watson and Mahomes, long term. But even when you look at the rest of the guys, like, was Bradford a success? Was Cam Newton a success? Was, Andrew Luck left early? I mean, it's no guarantee, right? It's no guarantee by the time these guys are 30, right? How many of these guys by the time they were 30 were still super relevant? right? I mean, you got to go back to like Stafford, right? So again, that's I would just there's not a ton of precedent for it to be super long term. I would just caution on that.
Yeah, and that's why what we say is, you either need one of two things. You're either going to be bullish and aggressive on the projecting ahead front, and that's what you just outlined, or the, going after incoming players early, 2-3 seasons. Do we really have enough information to have high confidence? And like you're saying, even mid-career, or you need to be a little more flexible with age, right? Because once a quarterback has been a long-term starter, you get to their late 20s, even into their 30s, you have eradicated the can they play part. You just don't stick and play that many games under center in the NFL if you have that much concern globally. I mean, you look at Ryan Fitzpatrick. I mean, he's hung around for, for example, I mean, he keeps getting starting opportunities, and he has been probably on the lowest rung of that. Has he really had the profile over the years to keep warranting more and more and more? So that's once you get, and that's why I really love like 28, 29 and up to about 33, 34, 35, because you have that prime window, of they've shown a lot. They probably had multiple top 6 seasons, probably a bunch of top 12 seasons, and they have some allegiances. And the worst case scenario is probably a Matthew Stafford type situation where a team is like looking to churn out, or maybe it's Matt Ryan, if they end up drafting the quarterback of the future. Or remember Aaron Rodgers, right? Oh, he only had a 12-1 touchdown to interception ratio, and, let's draft a first round quarterback and everyone flee from him off of the down year, quote unquote. So, so you get to your mid 30s, and then that's going to start cropping up. Are they going to move on? Are you really making a difference anymore? The team isn't very good. You have a down year, and is it time to move on or draft your successor? And then you're going to get the down, the downturn of your perception and market NFL wise, and likely dynasty as well. So that's going to be the risk on that if you're agnostic, but at least you don't have the risk of can they play? Like that's a major threshold that, like you just said, with Goff and Wentz, I mean, you can get to new contracts and mid-career technically and still have questions like that. Where again, with Cousins and Stafford, Ryan, guys like that, they're already falling, in terms, and that's never coming back. And yet you don't have that can they play question mark. You probably have that, are they going to play at this level at 38? Might be a question that you have.
Right.
And also I wanted to mention, we talked about Herbert for a fraction of a second, but just to kind of go back on top 12 seasons at the active quarterbacks in the NFL that were top 12 year one, you got Russell Wilson, Cam Newton, technically, again, he's still around. And you got Rivers, who just retired. You've got Dak Prescott, RG3, who would be a classical example of running around with fantasy-wise implications, but yet didn't develop passing-wise. And then you have Justin Herbert. So again, and Herbert, the good thing about him is, again, not getting a huge boost from the rushing side, which is actually, when you look at that list, is very, very promising, because that would put him on more Russell Wilson, Phillip Rivers, Dak Prescott, is kind of a blend of both. And then previous that you had Andrew Luck and Peyton Manning and guys like that. So it's very, very rare that will occur. Just to go back on the Herbert versus Trevor Lawrence spectrum there. Yeah. All right. This is Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, episode 42 of the Football Guys Dynasty Show. Time to talk some dynasty trading here. And let's rapid fire a few of these for our takes on player value, as well as team construction and ways to construct and make moves for your team. We have Kyler Murray and a 1 quarterback for 107. This one actually had quite a number of comments over on the Shark Pool completed dynasty trades thread.
Man, that's interesting. You're going to get, it's a difference maker, right? And I think that people might underestimate what a difference, we talked about this last week, as a matter of fact, the difference a quarterback can make in start 1, especially if they're elite, like it can be pretty good. I'd be interested sort of the other stuff involved. I wouldn't love doing a 1-for-1 like this, right? I'd probably want to get other pieces moving around. I don't think it's horrible. I would probably have gone about it a different way, would be my assessment of it.
Gone about meaning acquiring Kyler Murray?
Yeah, if I were going to trade for Kyler Murray and that was like sort of the asking price, I would sort of try to bake in an offset somehow, right? So whether it's make it a 2-for-2 where I'm flipping another player that I like, another player that I have for one that I see as an upgrade that maybe the other guy sort of sees the other side of, right? I would try and bake it in so that way I had a little bit more upside juice on the deal. I don't think it's a horrible trade. I would just I'm not prone to do trades like this.
If you had Kyler Murray as a secondary quarterback because you had another strong option, I mean, is this the type of thing you'd be looking to do to sell one of them, or would you keep both?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, right? It's hard to get like the amount of buyers that you're going to have, right? The amount of buyers that you're going to, it's a very illiquid market because the amount of buyers you have is going to be not that much. So kind of, it's funny you say, oh, I'm giving up like a player that, man, it seems like he probably should draw more than that, but the amount of buyers might be 2 or 3, right? In terms of guys. Yeah. So I mean, it's hard to get that. So I mean, it's good on the person for if there's, if they drafted Kyler Murray and then they have Mahomes or whatever, they have a better option or even an equal option. Like, good on you for getting sort of this return, because that's a tough return to get.
FFPC stock format here. We've got Hunter Henry and 110 for Travis Kelce and Corey Davis. Man,
that you said it's non-super flex?
Yep, just stock one quarterback.
Give me Kelce.
Okay. Yeah. Hunter Henry, is one where, the theme of the night, talking about Trevor Lawrence possibly, is, Hunter Henry being a floor player, right? Mm-hmm. That's been my take of him and my eval of his career arc and sort of where we're headed with this. We'll see with free agency, but I don't really know if he moves the needle much. Right. Even in 1.5, you're still talking the same threshold for tight ends. So yeah, I mean, get Kelce, get an impact guy, and you get Corey Davis thrown in. Let's see what happens with him with free agency. And I'd be surprised if Davis didn't make your 14 positional player cut line coming up in about a month's time. Mm-hmm. All right, how about this one for one quarterback? Same thing, FFPC. We got Joe Burrow and a future third for Jarvis Landry and a future second. This one's just for you.
This is interesting. Landry's my guy.
I know.
Yeah, Landry's. I just think he's very undervalued. It seems like though that Burrow would be the again, trade quarterback in a start one. It's tough. Like I said, it can be a very liquid market. I think Burrow's probably the longer term answer. And my thought would be, I probably could get more than. It feels like you're kind of selling low on him right now
because Landry's pretty cheap. Yeah, that's right. The interesting, and the fact that you still had to give up a pick. You didn't get a second straight out. That's the other thing that stood out for me.
Yeah,
I just don't think nothing really moves the needle for me at this entire deal, right? Because Landry's probably going to be one of, if not your last wide receiver. Wide receiver 4 or 5, maybe on your depth chart. After cuts, and then Burrow. Do you really feel comfy going in? I mean, you're probably going to need to go in with just one quarterback. If you have some superior quarterback, now you're keeping a second guy because you're hoping he has big time upside. So I don't know. And then those picks that are non-first, I mean, how many of second rounders survive a whole, 9 months on your roster? So I don't think anything is too significant in this deal. So I kind of shoulder shrugged. I thought you might have really divergent thoughts with Jarvis Landry, one of your guys in there.
I have a very strong take.
Exactly. All right. Last one here. And this is FFPC, one quarterback. We've got 109, Robert Tonyan, Michael Gallup, and Gabriel Davis. Maybe that's one of your guys too. For Austin Eckler and Curtis Samuel, Mr. Free Agent.
So you said 109, Tonyan,
Gallup, and Davis. So depending on how many of those are making your cuts for Eckler and Samuel.
Yeah, I'll just take the Eckler side. It wouldn't even be particularly close.
Okay. Yeah, the big part for me is it's 109, but I don't hold Tonyan's. Like, I would be a seller on him. I find it interesting that this is the method you would use to sell Tonyan. Like, I would try maybe second to first. I would try maybe moving up in the first to try to get to an auto kind of keep player for the first year or two. I mean, this must be a strong team. Well, they've, maybe 9 is their natural position, but Gallup is, a non-insignificant piece. Gabriel Davis is nice, but we have to remember it's 20-man rosters with the cut down. Right. So, I mean, that just kind of speaks to, these are guys that can be available for spots of time, on the waiver wire. All right, final segment here, and we've got quotes from the Footballguys Dynasty Forum this week. Are you ready, Jordan?
We got to zip through the trades because, this is my favorite segment. We went 38 minutes on the first one, so that's
exactly. Good. Jordan flies blind on this. I share some things, coming up for the show, like the trades or whatever, but not this part because I want these to be a complete impromptu reaction from him. So, and usually it regards some trades we've talked about or players we've talked about. So this is regarding Kyler Murray. he's an exciting player. Don't get me wrong, but he's not the cornerstone quarterback I'm looking for my dynasty teams.
I think that there are questions about his passing ability. And so I think that is real. And I think that is something that we need to see him take a step in terms of being a passer. So
cornerstone is a phrase I use, and I use it. Cornerstone usually for me means, that tier 1 guys, top maybe 5, 6, 7 rounds of a startup draft equivalency. It's sort of a feel. I'm not going to use generational or rare or elite or things like that, but cornerstone, I guess would be a guy that you're building around. Someone that has the longevity and developmental factor to be around for your competitive team for, a handful of years going forward.
Yeah. And I think he's on the precipice of being like, if we see him take a step forward as a passer, I'll feel a lot more comfortable. But right. If to sort of say, hey, is he a cornerstone? Like, he wouldn't be ahead of Watson, Prescott,
Right. And keep in mind, he was already, that Baker Mayfield danger zone last off season, before he saw this uptick of he has to do it or otherwise he's a massive, massive bust, because he was going early in the first round of Superflex.
Yes.
All right. This next one, we've got Trevor Lawrence has less of a chance of busting. Keep track of this math, by the way, Jordan. We've got Trevor Lawrence has less of a chance of busting than Kyler Murray does of having a career-ending injury.
So basically the chance that Kyler Murray has a higher rate of injury.
That's higher than Lawrence has of busting.
Oh, I would think that Lawrence has a higher chance of busting. How many quarterbacks do we see really have? Even Dak Prescott.
And Murray is one of the smarter guys in sort of how he slides proactively, and he's the opposite of Lamar Jackson, who runs like a running back.
Right. And this isn't like he has what I would consider like functional athleticism, where Robert Griffin III didn't. You know what I mean? Like, Robert Griffin III was constantly getting himself killed.
He was high kneeing his way down the sideline. It was beautiful when he did it, but 3 times.
Yeah, he
all right.
slid like a toddler.
Now, I don't know if you remember. Well, so we had a couple disagreements about dynasty trades. One of them was last week regarding it was James Robinson, right?
Yeah.
And I think we had one previously. I don't know if it was last week or maybe a couple weeks ago. It was about CeeDee Lamb and Josh Jacobs. So here, this is regarding that trade. So this is not my thoughts, Jordan. This is someone else. CeeDee Lamb greater than Josh Jacobs. So free 2022 first.
We'll see. Again, it is
correct.
The profile of
correct.
Jacobs is platinum, right? So again, if you want to go the other side, like, be my guest, but like there's you can look back on that and be like, man, that, like, you can look back on that in a couple years and be like,
you do acknowledge that there are people that have CeeDee Lamb wildly high in their wide receiver rankings.
Yeah,
that exists in the marketplace. Yeah.
So here's the thing that I would just say as a cautionary note on guys like CeeDee Lamb, right? One of the things we look at a couple of, we have to look at what we know, right? Which is his tape, his metrics, however you want to, divide that up, but also infer from that what we don't know. Okay. And one of the things that is glaring to me in terms of betting on CeeDee Lamb as being this sure thing is, if he was a sure thing, why didn't he play more than like 56% of snaps last year?
Well, when will he be the number 1 wide receiver on his own team?
It's probably going to be a while.
That should be pretty important if you are going to reach some elite alpha status, correct? Like, you sort of need the number 1. We've had
I'll even take number 2. I'll take number 2.
We've had settings where 2 wide receivers on the same team have been top 10, top 12. So could that be the setting? It's possible, but those don't happen very often. All right. Regarding Devonta Smith, I think 165 pounds is going to get killed in the NFL. Heisman or no Heisman?
I have a hard time disagreeing with that. That's the other position, though, that I think that you could sort of do the arbitrage thing, right? Just say, all right, whatever, I'll just take the cheaper guy, right? Just take the, whatever the asset is on top of it, right? I think, and again, like, I'm very excited about this draft class because of, right, that's a tactic that I like. If there's a tactic I'm good at, like if there's my best thing in Dynasty, it's probably extracting assets in a rookie draft in terms of moving around the board. I'm super excited about this draft. If there's going to be 4 quarterbacks in the top 10, another one in the first round, there's going to be 5, 6, 7, 8 guys in the at the wide receiver position. Heck, maybe we get a running back. I mean, all like that's going to be pretty interesting in terms of moving around the board. You're going to get Ayuk situations. You're going to get Justin Jefferson situations. You're going to get a lot of those opportunities. I think it's a really interesting, from what I do well, right? It's sort of right in my wheelhouse of a class.
I'm rooting for Devonta Smith not to weigh in at his pro day. I am rooting for that. I want him to go all the way. I actually don't want him to weigh in with his new NFL team. I want him to never weigh in. I want it to be like, I don't know if you've ever seen, but the WTA for women's tennis, like for guys, they list height and weight, and for women, they just list their height, and I think for Devonta Smith, for his entire NFL career, they should just list his height. But to be fair, if let's say at his pro day, he would weigh in at 165 pounds. If you were his agent, would you say don't weigh in?
Hey, I would say, here's what we're going to do. We're going out for sushi the night before. Put as much soy sauce as you could possibly put on that sushi, and drink as much water as you can drink, because we're going to try and weigh in real heavy. So,
and then and then we're going to run an hour later after you urinate it all out.
Yeah, and then we're just gonna hammer you with water, and by the time that cycle all happens, like you'll be back to playing weight within a couple hours, and you'll be fine.
I will say Marquise Brown is pretty much the only round 1 guy, in recent classes. It goes back a while that is even close to that like zone of weight. So it is very interesting, and I do think it's an interesting storyline for this offseason. All right, last one. This is regarding a 12-team non-PPR. It's much more likely that the difference between 106 and 108 is negligible in 2 months than there being a big tier break after the 106. So what's your general thoughts on tiering and like moving up proactively? I think this was regarding a trade where they traded like 206, 208 to move up those 2 spots now. Yeah.
Oh, in the second round or in the first round?
Well, they used that pick in the second round to move up from 108 to 106. And so someone was basically saying you're moving up like for an imaginary tier break now, when they're skeptical that that's, yes, you'll have 2 more players available to you when you're on the clock, by easy analysis. But what's your thought on trying to move up and maybe, I'm not going to say predict, but anticipate potential tier breaks?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a couple ways to go about this. You could say, like, what's the historical tier break in that range? And it's probably not that great, right? If you sort of look at it, like, it's not that steep. But I think the other thing is, again, sort of going to what I do well, which is, hey, I can sit at a spot and sort of navigate a trade down. Much easier to do that higher when there's more players there that are attractive to the market. So I tend to like to be move up in the draft, and then, matriculate my way down the board if I'm going to do that, either on the clock or sort of, once more information becomes known and those picks become more valuable. As there's a lot of narratives about Dynasty that are untrue factually. One that is 100% true is that picks become more valuable the closer you get to the clock, right? I think that one's 100% true. we can list off 3 dozen that aren't true. That's one I think that is true. And there's a lot of power in that. And plus you have control, right? And I hold, to go back to something we talked about earlier, if I hold 101, right, I can hold that for a long time. And, there's only one guy that's got it, right? And it's me, right? And even if I'm going to trade down, I can explore it a lot of different ways. I have a lot of power because people have to come through me if they want Lawrence. Being up higher on the board sort of gives you that, right? And you don't know, right? Your difference between 106 and 108 might be nobody. You might get the same person. Someone else might be really interested in 106 and pay you to move up, and you get a free move back. So I would rather be up high on the board. Ultimately, is there that big of a difference between the picks? Historically, probably not, but I think there's a lot more power to be up in the draft now.
Yeah, and and a couple points on that would be non-PPR, right? You get running backs going higher. So to expect 2 and maybe even 3 running backs to go in the top 5 would be possible, if not likely in that, which means you might get a look at your wide receiver 2. You might get a look at, tight end 1. You might, again, you just have more options. And again, you get 2 more players available to you. And I've been in drafts where if you have a big enough gap And it may be a small gap, but trading up, you send out offers and they go radio silent. They come onto they don't even say rejected. They just go onto the site and pick. So
right.
you, like you just mentioned, I think the control aspect is a big one. So if you're sitting there, even if you're 1 pick away, 2 picks away, like this example is, you still are going to have more options higher. And my general experience and observation is you trade up and you're going to be able to have the option to at least get what you paid to move down later. Like there's very little chance, oh, I'm stuck. I'm in this horrible spot. 106 is this magical black hole of this draft. 109 looks really good, but 106 looks horrible. Like that's unlikely to happen. And those extra 2 players that are available might be one of your clear target players you would take at 103. And the other thing I would say is if you want to move, someone falls, you think they should go 2 and they fall to 4 and 4 is on the clock. Do you think it's easier to get to 4 from 6 or 8? It's rhetorical. So you have just so much more flexibility. So giving a mid-ish second, to have this flexibility, could you have maybe got 1 spot higher, in raw value or something? Maybe. But you're going to have no trouble getting stuff back if you choose to trade back to 8 or 9 or 10 or whatever. But I'm always about proactively moving forward. And if that compresses your picks where you had 3 first rounders and now you have, 2, 4, and 6 instead of 2, 4, and 8, or you used to have 3 seconds and now you only have 2, that's all fine. That's easy. Like because you can always expand accordion style back in the draft or get more flexibility. And again, what's more likely to be able to trade back and get a future first out of a trade, 8 or 6? Again, It's just so think about these things, and it goes beyond there's going to be a big tier break after 6 and you're going to be right inside that line. That's creating a very specific storyline. So we spent a lot of time on that, but I do think this time of year, it's an important one in terms of positioning, proactive positioning in your rookie draft. All right. Sure. So that's going to do it. Reminder to subscribe, rate, and review the Football Guys shows through your listening apps. Also sign up for the Football Guys daily email update. Get all the news through free agency season leading up to the NFL draft, and especially when the fire hose opens up in late April as we push towards week 1 of the 2021 season. You can sign up at footballguys.com/free. In this episode, we talked a lot about Trevor Lawrence, a lot about profiles, as well as dynasty trading, and some of the great quotes from the Football Guys Dynasty Forum this week. I am Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your dynasty leagues. It's getting worse.